Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C. This is our first edition of the new year, 2013. It is, in fact, our Epiphany edition. We'll be celebrating Epiphany here in a couple of days. It is, of course, when the three magi of the Orient arrived in Bethlehem and got to see the face of God. And, of course, the Epiphany idea is you get to see what's what. You get to see the essence of things. So we've got to deliver on that promise, at least as best we can here. We've got to try to see into the essence of things. Epiphany, Sunday, January 6th. That's when this program, among other days, will be available on the air. So we've got to review, on the one hand, the haggling over the new Satan sandwich. This was Satan sandwich number 2, primarily because of 2 very toxic ingredients, which we will detail. And then we want to take this opportunity to create a kind of conceptual framework for the historical processes that will be operative in 2013 as best we can estimate. And we can't account for all of them. There is, for example, a heightened danger of a dip deeper into the Depression after a period of relative stagnation within the Depression. We may have another sickening downward lurch into the depths of the Depression. But main question now is the political framework and how do we get out of this. I urge you, as always, keep in touch through Tarpley.net, and Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed. The Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed, very active here in recent days, during the time on, especially on Sunday here. Sunday. It was New Year's Day. Seemed like Sunday. The Tuesday of this week when the haggling was at its height. So let's, we can have one happy note at the beginning. Goodbye to Ron Paul. Goodbye to the leprechaun. Goodbye to the most extreme exponent of fascist economics that we have anywhere in the Congress. His plan for $1 trillion in genocidal budget cuts, killer cuts, goes with him. He never implemented it. And I have to say, I have talked to various Ron Paul diehards during the Christmas holidays. Most of them do not know. They simply do not know, have not read, are not familiar with the true monstrosity of Ron Paul's budget cuts. They believe these throwaway lines that he wanted to cut the defense budget and save the domestic programs. Anything but. It's called Restore America. Take a look, and if you are not willing to read that, you should please shut up and not purvey disinformation about what this guy stood for. And the key example, cutting food stamps by 62%. If 50 million Americans live on $1.50 per person per meal, he wanted to bring that down to something like 50 cents per person per meal. And I'm sorry, that will kill. That would mean hundreds of thousands of deaths. So goodbye to the leprechaun. Unfortunately, we've still got little Rand, the mediocrity, encumbering the scene, but maybe with some of the tendencies we can identify, this particular brand of crazy may be on its way out. Now let's look at the fiscal cliff and its related solutions and so-called solutions and haggling. First of all, it was already media hype, right? It was a term, as we've stressed, invented by helicopter Ben Bernanke, undoubtedly designed by somebody like Frank Luntz, in order to create hysteria and to allow Republicans in particular to scare the public about this. It was not what it was cracked up to be, and it led to this season of haggling. Notice that on the verge of the final phase, John Boehner the Republican Speaker of the House lost control of his extreme right wing. In other words, the Tea Party, the fascistoid caucus of the Republican Party, a fascistoid caucus within a reactionary party. He lost control of them. He couldn't get his Plan B even voted on. He dropped out of the negotiations. And interestingly, it was at that point, it was left up to Biden to bring the Republicans back from the dead. After Plan B and that fiasco, and after Boehner taking himself out of the negotiations, the White House would have been amply justified in saying, this gaggle, you can't negotiate with them. They're not serious. Let's take a vote. And if it doesn't pass, over we go. Then we'll take another vote. But no, when Mitch McConnell, the plutocrat who believes that money is speech, right, one of the foremost representatives of the legions of greed on Capitol Hill, when Mitch McConnell called Biden eagerly jumped in to bring the Republicans back from the dead, to give them a voice, even after they had really disqualified themselves from any such role. So the design that they made in the Satan sandwich package is, you can see it especially on 2 points. And these are the 2 points that I object to the most. First of all, the capital gains tax. The capital gains tax for many people went from 15% to 20% on capital gains. Now, for the super rich, there will be a couple of more percent having to do with Obamacare, but call it 20%. This is a monstrosity. Capital gains have to be taxed as ordinary income. No distinction made. Capital gains are income. Income can be considered capital gains. Remember that under capital gains, even the people who support this say income, your normal pay, is a capital gain, but only if you're a hedge fund hyena, only if you're Romney, only if it falls under the so-called carried interest loophole. So that is all a monstrosity. The only way to deal with that would have been to say there will be no more special rate on capital gains. It will be ordinary income in whatever tax bracket you happen to be located. But instead, Biden gave them this 20% sweetheart rate. The other question is the estate tax. Deeper research into this has convinced me that the estate tax should have gone to the Clinton levels, and instead a sweetheart deal on that was worked out. Now, this was a clever design in the sense that the two conspirators here, Biden and McConnell in particular, obviously put these two things in, the capital gains sweetheart rate and the estate tax sweetheart rate. And this is several hundred billion. This is something like 300 billion, 400 billion of revenue that the federal government will not get over the next decade. And the point is that the people who are most concerned about capital gains and the estate tax are the owners of the Tea Party. The Tea Party, a bunch of right-wing anarchists, rural dupes, bumpkins, hayseeds, yahoos, pitchforks, and so forth. Maybe they don't know it. They really should know it. They are owned by the Koch brothers, by Richard Mellon Scaife, and now by this guy Stevenson, right, the Cancer Treatment Centers of America guy who owns Freedom Works at this point, paid out the $8 million to Dick Armey. This is not a matter of high principle. I just saw a woman on Fox News saying, the Tea Party is a movement of high principle. The Tea Party is a movement of extortion and corporate welfare, except that the dupes at the bottom are too dumb to know it. Anyway, the hypnotic appeal of the capital gains, the estate tax, meant that Koch, Mellon, Scaife, and these guys gave orders to the Tea Party, don't gum up the works, don't rock the boat. And so it was. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So we're just reviewing the results of the first round of clashes of the new year. This is the so-called fiscal cliff. And again, the key to getting that passed, in my view, was that in particular, Biden-McConnell inserted sweetheart giveaway rates to the super rich on capital gains and the estate tax. as well as this other exercise of lowering the threshold for a tax increase, or for raising it, actually, that Obama wanted it for families up to $250K, and the Republican plutocrats said, no, we want to save them up to $450K. That's debatable one way or another, but I think the inexcusable aspect is we needed to tax capital gains as ordinary income. That's number one. And the estate tax should have been kept in its full rigor. The estate tax is your last chance to nick those parasites, those hedge fund hyenas, corporate raiders, bandits, and looters who made out in the Reagan years, the Bush the Elder years, down to the present time. Last chance to nick them before they essentially put that money into foundations and their probably mentally deficient descendants. So that's the bad part. Now, you have a school of thought. Jeffrey Sachs wants austerity for all. There is a school of the Democratic Party, or sort of leftists, if you can believe it. I'd call it the IMF left. Jeffrey Sachs, of course, notoriously speaks for the International Monetary Fund. This is the guy who destroyed Bolivia, destroyed Poland, destroyed the Soviet economy, has wrought untold misery. Then he had the Damascus Road conversion to becoming a development economist. He's concerned now with mosquito nets against malaria in Africa. Jeffrey Sachs wants the full Clinton tax rates to go up to there, up on everybody. I don't see the point of that, and I think that's poverty of thinking. I think Howard Dean is also more or less in that same kind of camp. No, we don't need to raise taxes on average Americans. We're not in the business of austerity and share the misery and shared sacrifice. And again, taxation has to be progressive. It has to cut deeply into the luxuries of the super rich. They go from 3 private jets to 1 or none. Rather that than have the people at the bottom deprived of the basic necessities, or even the middle class deprived of some amenities that brighten up their lives. So that's clear. We reject the austerity for the sake of austerity. Rather, we welcome here, first of all, and this is probably the work of these congressional progressives, right? This is to get them to vote for it, right? It's got to be designed so people vote for it. The American Opportunity Tax Credit and other education credits stay in. The child tax credit is renewed. The earned income tax credit remains. That's important. Various business tax breaks that you can write off. You can expense business purchases more rapidly. You don't have to worry about depreciation, stuff like that. Green jobs, well, that's dubious. On the other hand, they do have some green jobs, so we would be against that, but we're not going to make a hue and cry about it. The fixing of the alternative minimum tax, well, fine. Jobless benefits. Jobless benefits for 2 million people. Problem with this, first of all, it's only 1 year. A lot of these tax deals are open-ended, right? They make tax cuts permanent, if you will. Why not make jobless benefits permanent? That's a big shortfall. You're going to come back, and whenever you come back, you can be sure extortion, blackmail, sabotage by the Republican fanatics. But 2 million people will get jobless benefits. Wait a minute, though. What about the 99ers? Hey, Ed Schultz, all last year you were pledging that you would fight to the death for the 99ers. What happened to you? What happened to the 99ers? I haven't heard anything about the 99ers in months. These, of course, the really long-term unemployed. Jobless payments have got to be made permanent, and they've got to be made open-ended. You keep getting them until you find a job. And if the job creators are wonderful heroes in the Republican mythology, if they're on capital strike and they don't create those jobs, then by God, people will continue to get jobless benefits. We have to do it that way because Clinton has destroyed aid to families with dependent children and even general assistance welfare, which is for people who may not have such children. Pell Grants seem to go forward. WIC seems to go forward. Head Start goes forward as far as I can see. So those are all positive things. So all in all, it's obviously going to be a compromise. Even in the world of Obama, that's certainly not, it's not the worst result for Obama. Main problem, capital gains. Main problem, estate tax. Now, let's use that as a prelude to discuss, obviously we also reject the extreme right-wing position. Today, National Public Radio, Diana Rehm show, they had a Canadian fascist on there, a guy called Chris Edwards from the Cato Institute. The Cato Institute, paid for by the Koch brothers. And he wants the takedown of the entitlements. He does a whole demagogic rap on the old against the young, that the old are ripping off the young, and he wants farm subsidies abolished, and so on, and so on, and so on. There was a milk fix in the process, which got very little attention. I have not had a chance to study the milk fix, but here's what we can tell you for sure. At the end of all this, out comes Obama and promises more killer cuts in Medicare. Now, this is somebody who has already cut $700 billion out of Medicare. Don't tell me, Obama, that you can cut $700 billion out of a program and that there's no impact on the service. It's all fine to say, yeah, we're clawing that back from those insurance companies that George W. Bush, Mad Dog Bush the Younger, wanted to enrich with his Medicare Part D. That's all fine, but not to the tune of $700 billion. That might be $50 billion, $100 billion, $200 billion tops, but not $700 billion over a decade. I'm sorry, you are carving deeply into Medicare, but he promises to cut more. He's talking about cutting about another $400 billion out of Medicare. Well, the answer to that is stop him. We were lucky this time. He wanted to impose the chained consumer price index, the chiseling, gouging mechanism that will let Social Security wither on the vine. The death of 1,000 cuts is typical signature method, pure Obama, treachery, deception, dissembling. You run for president saying, I will defend the entitlements, and now he's promising he's going to cut entitlements. Sorry. Time to stop Obama on that stuff. Progressives, so-called, take off the gloves. This is not the Messiah. He's a desperate demagogue. Bash him mercilessly. Stop him from selling you out. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio, reminding you to keep in touch with Tarpley.net, Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed. If you have let 2012 go by without getting a copy of Just Too Weird, Bishop Romney and the Mormon Takeover of America with Polygamy, Theocracy, and Subversion, you should order a copy of Just Too Weird. Electronic, very cheap. Paper copy, much better. Put it in your permanent library. Not just the Romney campaign as the vehicle for a coup d'etat, with people like Petraeus, with Stavridis, Ham, with Admiral Goulet, the head of the Missile Defense Organization, and so forth. The Gallup poll, the head of Lockheed, Senator Dement of South Carolina. We now have word of the negotiations between Rupert Murdoch and Petraeus, trying to get him to become a presidential candidate. I told you already in 2009, 2010, Petraeus is the focus of Bonapartist tendencies in the U.S. government. Military coup. You get it? That's now confirmed. So stay tuned. Tarpley.net keeps you ahead of the news. But in order to understand these things, you've got to do the background reading. That's called Just Too Weird, Bishop Romney and the Mormon Takeover of America. Now, let's look at the perspective going forward. We want to stop Obama's Medicare cuts. Let's look forward to the inauguration weekend, right? The Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday of Obama's second inaugural That, I think, is the time for a great gathering of the clans here in Washington, D.C., anti-austerity forces, people of goodwill. If you don't want genocide, because Obama will give you genocide just as sure as Ron Paul. Ron Paul comes out in the open, says, here, we want this many mega deaths. Obama, of course, not so crude, much more subtle, much more nuanced, but still the hecatomb ensues. Remember all these people. We want to warn austerity ghouls, budget hawks, Malthusian propagandists. The Nuremberg reckoning will apply. At the end of all this, a Nuremberg reckoning. High crimes against humanity include the refusal to provide adequate food, clothing, shelter, medical care to human populations. And this will not change. So we have these precedents, and we should refer back to them. Now let's look at the Republican Party. Usefully, we have some reactionaries. We have Joe Scarborough, who says the seeds have now been planted for the destruction of the House GOP majority. Let's not stop there, Joe. The seeds have been planted for the destruction of the Republican Party as we have known it. The destruction in place of the main reactionary, openly reactionary party. We've been talking about this. The framework is that of the party realignments. We've gone through these party systems. Each party system implies an ideological climate. It implies certain groups that make up a governing majority. It often implies an electoral college map. The first one, the foundation of the federal government under Alexander Hamilton. Whatever else happened, the crimes of Jefferson, the crimes of Madison, the debacle of the initial War of 1812, it's all okay. The nation survived. Hamilton wins. Positive phase. Second phase, the demagogue Andrew Jackson, his destruction of the Bank of the United States, his provocation of the Panic of 1837 under Van Buren. Economic development stops. Canal building slows, stops. Railroad building slowed. Economic development slows down, stops. The slave power conspiracy makes a comeback, and we get secessionism and civil war. The biggest failure of them all, Andrew Jackson, is down there in the ninth circle. He's damned into the ice at the bottom of the inferno as a traitor because he was a disciple of Aaron Burr. Third cycle, Abraham Lincoln, new Republican Party, Whig Party has collapsed. The Know-Nothing Party, sort of like the Tea Party, has collapsed. And then we get Lincoln. It's a success at a terrible cost, but out of this comes the greatest industrial power the world has ever seen, the Transcontinental Railroad, all kinds of social and economic progress with obvious problems. This lasts until the end of the century. Remember that in 1895, Wall Street seized control of the U.S. federal government under Grover Cleveland through a conspiracy of London and Morgan to control the U.S. public debt. The news cycle beginning in 1896, the McKinley cycle, can't blame poor McKinley. You get figures like Theodore Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, and the reactionaries of the 1920s. You can see this is bad. It brings you the Federal Reserve System, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It brings you the U.S. entry into World War I, a disaster, making the world safe, not for democracy, but for fact. That's what came out of World War I. So that one is a failure. And that sets the stage. 1932, the new cycle, Lindy Roosevelt New Deal, the most successful, the creation of a society which the middle is, for the first time in human history, the numerical majority, programs to make that happen, the growth of the trade union movement, rising standard of living, social and economic, cultural progress, defeat fascism, hold off communism, solve the secrets of the atom, go to the moon, scientific progress, highest standard of living in the 50s and 60s that the world had ever seen, and the generalization of this to the world under the Bretton Woods system, the Marshall, and so forth. A success, the most successful. That then, the OBJ destroys the domestic program, the culmination of the New Deal. In 1960, when Nixon is Humphrey, a rather traditional New Deal Democrat, although unfortunately a low-quotient one, that's the beginning of the Southern strategy. That's the beginning of the new Republican majority celebrated by Kevin Phillips. So from 1968 until 2008, we can now say in retrospect, that was a party system. in which the dominant force, the center of gravity of American politics, was the Deep South. And this was based on racism. It was the abreaction of the old Confederate state against Johnson and the Democratic Party imposing the Civil Rights Act of 1964, public accommodations in interstate commerce, Voting Rights Act, and related legislation. This busted up the world of Jim Crow, the Redeemers, the Ku Klux Klan, the racists, the Bourbon Southern politicians. And that was then what set the tone ideologically for the entire country. We'll go through this in some detail if we get time at the end of the broadcast. So that's the Southern strategy. Now, that was based, as we've said, on the Southern states, white men, Southern populations in general, evangelical Christians, largely bigoted, having very little charity, very little of the message of Christ in their gospel. Plus also Xers. In terms of generations, the population, the age cohort that's most interested in supporting wars, the Xers, and taking down the social safety net, also the Xers. They believe in a grim social Darwinistic view of the world. Somebody like Tom Cruise, their basic argument, we never had any benefits, why should anybody else? So this is very ugly. They're comparable to the lost generation out of which the main fascist leaders emerged in the wake of World War I. So these things are now changing. Instead of the Southern strategy, it's clear now, we've now got the new majority, which is what? Hispanics, blacks, young people, women, along with some ideological groups, Asian Americans, and that's now the emerging majority. That is what has now validated. It wasn't there in 2008, but by 2012, it's clear there has been a party alignment. Thank God, it's still open. There's still in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Now in the last segment of our first hour here in our Epiphany show, we want to go to Michigan. Last week we heard from Reverend Pinckney in Benton Harbor, Michigan, about the battles after the November election. Remember in November, the Michigan ballot had two statewide questions. The first one was, do you want to strike down the emergency manager law imposed by Governor Snyder? I would call this the Little Hitler law, that every city, Benton Harbor, Pontiac, Flint, Ecorse, Detroit even, would have its own little Hitler, a little dictator who would basically send the mayor and the city council home. That did get down, but now we've learned that Snyder came back with a slightly, which was, should the right of collective bargaining be any Michigan state constitution? That held. Apparently, the UAW and others were more interested in Obama getting reelected than they were in getting the rights of working people. So we know that Reverend Pinckney is the absolute front line in this. He's coming to us straight from a meeting held last Saturday on the last weekend of the old year, what to do about this. So we're looking forward to getting a report. And remember, this is where you want to get engaged and mobilize and do whatever you can to help it with money, Twitter, or in any form you can. Reverend Pinckney, how you doing? Happy New Year.
Hey, Happy New Year to you. And once again, it's an honor to be on your show again, just to be able to give about Michigan itself.
Right. We're very much focused on Michigan, as you know. So I guess we'd start with that Saturday meeting, right? You're confronted with the situation, right? Snyder, he doesn't care about the will of the people. He says, I'll have my emergency managers one way or another. And he's also busting all the unions at the same time. So how are you going to fight back?
Well, here's what we came up with. One of the things, the union themselves, we had an overflow crowd on that Saturday. It was last, actually. And we want people to understand how serious this matter is. And people don't quite get it, especially the people who can really help. And what we had people from all over the state of Michigan to come. And then we decided we fight back. We try to come legally with it, and also preparing for the election that's going to be in 2014, I believe. When it runs again in 2 years. We prepared to deal with him on that level. So the meeting itself, what we worked out is that we have to get ourselves ready to get out here, start mobilizing and organizing the whole state in order to win this election. And our focus was on the election and this emergency manager law that will go into effect the last week of March, the new one. So we really was on top of what we were doing. We had several speakers to speak, and people spoke about things that we need to do immediately. My thing, I was very, very excited to see the people who came in and actually wanted help. But we're not going to sit back and allow the union to continue to use us. We're not going to do it. Either they're going to be part of it or they're not going to be. We don't stand up for their issues. We want them to stand up for everybody's issues just like we stood up for them. So that was really the most important thing about the meeting on Saturday, and I take it.
Pinkney, and I think you're very right to have those provisos. I think it needs to be escalated. Another thing to care about people who are not in unions, who are unemployed or destitute, whatever it is. That's the other thing that concerns me. Seen in Wisconsin and elsewhere, the popular movement, the mass movement, can win a referendum in, say, Ohio. They can defeat Kasich, very similar kind of guy. But as soon as you have to go through the Democratic Party, as in the attempted recall of Walker, then the Democratic Party is going to give you some hack who won't even mention labor issues. So what I wonder is was there discussion about the need to intervene in the Democratic Party primary process to groom a candidate who would be acceptable to the mass movement, to labor, to minorities, and other people who, Democratic.
What we talk about, February the 23rd, we're going to be in Detroit at Cope Hall, where the Democratic Party is going to meet. And we talk about more than 1,000 strong. To let them know that we're willing to stand up against the Democratic Party. To allow the Democrats, just because they're black, you're going to vote for a Democrat, or you're going to be you automatically voting Democratic. And this is the message that we're sending out. The Saturday meeting was so informal that the people there was like, we wanted everybody to give their opinion about how they felt and why certain things has happened and why we're not being included. That's the thing. So we're going to deal with the union and the Democratic Party, and we're going to tell both of them either put up or shut up.
And I would add a third front, if I could, which is what you see from the outside. At different times, we had people like Rachel Maddow or Ed Schultz get interested in Wisconsin or with this time. What I've seen in the last couple of weeks is that they're absolutely silent, and there's very little reporting about this. And this is where those of us outside of Michigan come in. I would say that using media could put some pressure on these fake leftists of the media and say, look here, if you're not reporting the Michigan situation, then you're a shill for America and big bank and get the word out. I think it's pretty clear. National publicity is very bad for somebody like Snyder and his machinations.
Oh, absolutely. And you're absolutely correct, because what we want to do now, we're going to change this thing around, because now people are beginning to see exactly what's happening here in the state of Michigan. We have to win some things. When we won Proposal 1, people they was ecstatic. It was like something that you never heard of. People got out and voted. And that was part of what we did. We got them out and voted. And now what we got to do, we got to challenge the Democratic Party, we got to challenge the unions, and we got to, like you said, the news media. So we have to start challenging these three. And I'm glad you brought that to my attention, because on Saturday we did not speak in terms of challenging the news media. And that may have been my fault, because it wasn't on our agenda. So, they can blame me for that.
You can't do everything all at once. And again, I would say it's for those of us outside of Michigan, right? How can we contribute? Well, the main thing is to get that, merciless light of national and indeed international publicity on these events, right? Because if you say to somebody, look, there's a fascist dictatorship in Michigan that's being created, city by city, then, people in Europe, Russia, Latin America, they need to know about this. And that adds to the pressure. When you get delegations visiting embassies or foreign ministries around the world calling in the U.S. ambassador and demanding explanations on the human rights violations, the violations of the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights in Michigan, that's when you get the fighting and so forth.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm just happy to be able to be on your show so we can get the word out and let people know that this dictator, that's what he is, a dictator, that Governor Snyder himself have imposed on these cities here in the Michigan. And that's what it is.
Okay, Evan, can you take a couple of minutes? I'd just like to get you to tell people again how they can contact you and help, and then we'll a couple of minutes in the next segment. All right?
I got you.
Okay, we'll be right back on World Crisis Radio. Welcome to the second hour of World Crisis Radio. This is our first broadcast of the new year. It is our special Epiphany show. It's when we try to tell you what's what, right? You can actually see the face of reality. So that's why we're so happy to be joined again by Reverend Pinckney of Benton Harbor, Michigan, who has been one of the key leaders in the resistance against what amounts to a fascist dictatorship in Benton Harbor, Flint, Pontiac. I don't hear too much from Michael Moore about this. He seems to have gotten out of town. Maybe he'll think again, right? He's somehow associated with some of those places. But Reverend Pinckney's just been telling us that last Saturday there was a meeting there in Benton Harbor, and the idea is to try to defeat Governor Snyder at the polls, I guess in 2014. But the immediate focus is the 23rd of February at Cobo Hall in Detroit. Reverend, that sounds like the Jefferson-Jackson dinner. Is that what that is?
That is, they're having a meeting, the Democratic Party.
Right.
Is having a meeting on that day. I don't know what it is exactly, but we plan to be there. We voted on it on Saturday to make sure that we be there, and we plan on being, we're talking about several thousand people around the community from every city plans to be there, and we're going to represent, and we're sick and tired of the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party has done exactly nothing over these years, but yet they always get our vote.
There we go. I think that's, Reverend, I have some experience in Michigan. I think that's the Jefferson-Jackson dinner. Anyway, for sure, it's the 23rd of February, Cobo Hall, everybody knows, downtown Detroit, across from that Renaissance Center. So what is it, probably about 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the evening? Absolutely. I urge people to go there. If you're in Chicago, if you're in Cleveland, any place like that, go to Detroit. If you're in Toronto, go contribute and protest. Now, the other thing is for this, we want to get some international media attention, right? People like Press TV, Russia Today. Russia Today in particular, right? They spend so much time on Julian Assange and Ron Paul. How about paying some attention to real mass struggles? Now, Reverend, tell people now, again, how they can help you and your group and give the contact information so that people can support you from the outside.
Hey, that's beautiful. Listen, let's start with February the 1st. We plan to be in L.A., Los Angeles, California, at the Shriner Auditorium, 665 West Jefferson. We are going to protest the NAACP Image Awards and the NAACP. We must hold the NAACP accountable for their actions and inaction. So the way to reach me, you can call me at 269-925-0001. That's 269-925-0001, or you can write me at Banco, BANCO, 1940 Union, Benton Harbor, Michigan, 49022. That's Banco, BANCO, 1940 Union, Benton Harbor, Michigan, 49022. You can help us if you're willing to help sponsor someone to get to Los Angeles for this protest. You can send a check to Banco, BANCO, 1940 Union, Benton Harbor, Michigan, 49022, because we need all the help we can get. We are going to hold all organizations accountable for their actions and inaction. That's part of what we do. We are sick and tired of being pushed to the side, and now it's time to stand up and fight. And that's what I want to do.
Reverend, let me just ask you, who gets these image awards? Who are the people? Do we know who's going to get them?
Well, they got a list of them. They got Denzel, Jamie Foxx, Samuel Jackson, but we got a list of people who are being nominated. We won't know until probably the night that who's going to receive it, but my goal is also to send each one of them a letter asking them not to attend.
Right.
So I think that would be tremendous, because somebody got to let them know that what the NAACP is doing is wrong. I mean, what you're doing is wrong. You're not standing up for the people in the community. And we're demanding that Ben Jealous resign, and then we allow the membership elect the president of the NAACP, not the board member. That way he's hand-picked. So we got some issues, and we want to go further and deal with all these other issues about their being out of touch with the community. We need the NAACP to stand up and be counted.
All right. Well, Reverend, we admire your courage, and we want to keep in touch with you, and I hope in the coming weeks we can get you back on periodically. If something big happens, you can always reach me, and we'll get you back on right away.
Hey, appreciate that.
We're here once a week, okay?
Good. And let me say this. I have received many, many calls from your listeners here. And, I mean, from all over the country, they've been calling, and they're excited about the idea that I'm on your show and your show itself. So I want to thank you because, actually, we're getting the word out.
That's right, and I think you're in the front line, so the rest of us we're in relatively cushy circumstances compared to Michigan. So Michigan, I would suggest we got to make that the focus of international class struggle and get the word out, because again, Snyder is somebody who thrives. I guess he's like a worm on the underside of a rock, right? He thrives in darkness and dampness and no light and no heat. So if we can provide some heat and light, then we can make it harder for Snyder to operate.
Absolutely, and we are going to defeat him in 2014.
There we go. Now we need to groom a candidate. If we can't get you as a candidate, we've got to get somebody comparable and groom that person and send them through the primaries.
Hey,
I think we can help on that too.
Oh, absolutely. Let's do this together.
Okay. Thank you again, Reverend. Happy New Year.
Thank you very much
for
having me.
Big year of struggle, 2013. Bye-bye. All right. Thanks to Reverend Pinckney in Benton Harbor, Michigan, and we'll be in touch with him continuously, because that's the United Front. People wonder, where's the United Front, right? United Front against austerity is obviously in a practical united front, right? We're trying to accomplish these tasks, and as time goes on, through the interaction, these ideas of Wall Street sales tax and other big picture economic reforms will be part of it. But for right now, we don't want unions to be destroyed. Unfortunately, the unions are not able to protect themselves because of the failing moral and intellectual qualities of their leaders, so they're not able to fight somebody like Snyder. And, of course, you've got this millstone of the Democratic Party around your neck, and you're expected to sacrifice for Obama and, indeed, to embrace killer austerity because it's important for Obama's political legacy. Sorry, no way. So here we go. We were talking about the collapse of the Republican Party. Now, let me just repeat. The goal of all this is that the American people deserve a New Deal economic reform party. When you ask the American people, do you wish to retain Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid with no cuts and no changes, you get 75 to 80% who say, yes, that's what we want. That's one of the main things that we want. However, both political parties, elitists, out of touch, plutocrats, and corrupt and cowardly, don't share that view. We don't have a New Deal party. How ironic. Great democracy. 75% of the people want the New Deal. No political party represents it. The Republicans representing an open, raving attack with people like Romney, Ron Paul, and then Obama representing a treacherous stealth attack on the New Deal economic program. So this is what we're trying to readjust the system so that a New Deal party emerges. The chances are improving. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. We got 2 segments left. We got to move fast to catch up with the necessary analysis, give you the background for the coming events. The principal problem of U.S. politics is that 3/4 of the American population demand their economic rights as ratified under the New Deal. The Republicans are an open assault on that tradition. The Democrats are a stealth assault using deception and trickery. How do we get out of this? Well, the first step I would submit is the collapse of the Republican Party as a national party. The second step is the split of the Democrats into two factions, current or separate parties, even better. That would be the Wall Street Democrats of people like Truman, Carter, Clinton, Obama, and then in the tradition of Roosevelt and Kennedy, the New Deal Democrats, where we could probably hope to get people like Elizabeth Warren, we could get Sherrod Brown, we could get Marcy Kaptur, DeFazio, Sherman, and some others. That would be the hope. Now, how do we stand on that? I would say the collapse of the Republican Party, thanks again to Scarborough, that the seeds for the destruction of the GOP House majority have already been planted. Let them germinate. Let them grow. We've also got, I think it's Kramer of CNBC writes an essay, Crazy Does Not Win. Crazy is the lunatics of the Tea Party. So, how do we stand? What we're aiming at is the destruction of the Republicans as a national party. Now, the symptoms we have, the likely form of the collapse of the Republicans, first of all, would be the subsiding of the Republicans, their collapse to become a regional party of racist and reactionaries in the Deep South, in certain points of the Midwest, and in the Intermountain West, right? Strong points in Utah, wherever there are Mormons and so forth, and the reactionary view will be prominent. From the point of view of the U.S. Petty bourgeoisie, businessmen, brokers. Remember, the essence of the Tea Party is brokers, real estate brokers, stock brokers, insurance brokers, veterans, people like this, small businessmen, low-wage, sweatshop, small businessmen. That's very important for the Republican Party. I want to point out this guy, Bob Brinker, on a radio program called Money Talk, which is very widely syndicated on the weekend. It tells people how to invest their money. He's the Ginnie Mae guy. Bob Brinker, this past week, says if you cause the default of the federal government, you are guilty of treason. And people called in and said, Bob, can you really mean that our Republican heroes are guilty of treason? Yes, if they cause the default of the federal government, says Bob Brinker of Moneyline, that is high treason. All right. The entire Republican position is one of blackmail, extortion, and sabotage. The debt ceiling. If we don't get the killer cuts, the genocidal austerity, the dark ages social policies that we want, then we will bankrupt and default, make the federal government go into default. On the sequester, if we don't get what we want, then all these cuts will occur, and the continuing resolution for the budget, if we don't get what we want, we will shut down the federal government. The really serious one, of course, is the debt ceiling. This is one of the flaws of the Obama fiscal cliff negotiations, is the debt ceiling could well have been included. Now, Obama is saying loudly that he will not haggle on the debt ceiling. He will not be extorted and blackmailed. Obama, if you want to make that stick, you've got to cite the 14th Amendment and your constitutional authority, and that you are compelled, the constitutional compulsion to pay the debts of the United States. The debt ceiling is unconstitutional. Default is illegal. It's a federal crime to let the United States go into default. We could round up a lot of these lunatics under that one, especially since we've got the necessary authorities under multiple national states of emergency. Now, are there symptoms of the Republicans collapsing to a regional party? There are. A couple of weeks ago, we cited the Washington Post that the Tea Party has nothing to say about the fiscal cliff. They don't come forward. And we got the story of one of the Tea Party fanatics, this rather obscure woman who's the co-founder of Tea Party Patriots, comes to Washington, meets with Congress people from Texas and Georgia and other places, and discusses more or less exclusively state issues, giving up on federal issues. It's a tendency these people have anyway, right? They like the state better because, frankly, it's easy for oligarchs to get their way in a state. The problem, the advantage of the federal government, the reason it's generally a little bit better than many states, is that oligarchical interests of all kinds clash. They cancel each other out. I've been trying to argue this on Twitter lately. You could see it very clearly over this past weekend. When evil fights evil, good benefits. In effect, if we didn't have evil fighting evil, the world would have been overwhelmed by evil long ago. The main advantage we have is that evil does not all agree among itself, right? It can't get along. But now we have an even more spectacular, and this is truly spectacular, the question of the Sandy money. The big news of this past week, that Boehner, in order to cover his idiotic right flank to this crew of wreckers and saboteurs, the party of extortion, blackmail, sabotage, and treason, the Tea Party, the fanatics, right, the dupes of Koch, John Stevenson, and Millen Scaife, and many others. These right-wing anarchists working for finance capital, which means pretty much fascists, they have blocked the money for Sandy relief. I'm thinking now of that famous New York City headline. You can find it in Surviving the Cataclysm. Ford to city, drop dead. Boehner to New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Maryland, Delaware, Virginia, and Pennsylvania, drop dead, says the Republican Party. They wouldn't vote on it, and it means significant delays, and also, people, it will not be automatic, because these lunatic Tea Party people, after the two wars that were off-budget and all sorts of other shenanigans off-budget, right, Abramoff off-budget and so forth, they now have to have everything offset, right, paid for, as they say, pay-go, and it will not be automatic to get that money. I hope the Tea Party fight to the death to prevent that money from going. So what do we have? Governor Chris Christie of New Jersey comes out and says, Boehner and the toxic politics of the Republican majority of the House of Representatives are guilty of sacrificing my state. King says, the hand that held the dagger has plunged it into the back, and that's Boehner. So Republicans attack Boehner. That is the death sentence of any Republican congressman in the Northeast. Goodbye, King. Goodbye, Staten Island Republicans. You've had it. Back in a minute. Welcome back to the last segment of our Epiphany program. Let's see how much more illumination we can put forward. The Tea Party already dwindling towards state-only issues, Texas, Georgia. Boehner now attacking New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, and Pennsylvania. Quite a big slice of the Electoral College, I must say. Christie in a big attack on Boehner, his toxic policies, his betrayal, and King, perhaps even more interesting, King, the corrupt Margiotta machine out there on Long Island, Nassau County. King says that Boehner is expressing a regional hatred, and that the idea among these rural characters, the Tea Party, is that any money sent to the New York area is corrupt. Now, again, I would think that ought to be enough to get any Republican congressman in any of those states defeated, smashed, gone, because now Boehner is promising a vote on Friday, and who knows what, that'll be about $9 billion, and then a week or two later, another vote. But there's no guarantee, because the fanatics are saying, well, no, we want everything paid for. Well, this is not good. So you get the idea that it's beginning to act, that the real underlying tension is that the Republican majority in the House of Representatives is incapable of national action, because they are these rural Southern reactionaries of the Tea Party caucus in a formal sense. About half of them are from the South. That's about 10 from Texas, 4 from Georgia, I believe. Then there are about 10 from the Midwest. Remember the Midwest is where the Lindbergh pro-Hitler sentiment was strongest some 70 years ago. The rest of them, the Intermountain West and the various Mormon enclaves. So that's what it is. That's the 40 or so, formally speaking, in the Michelle Bachmann Tea Party caucus. And then they've got about 20 or 30 fellow travelers. Now, just so we say it, what's the answer to all this stuff? Well, to go forward, first of all, the 14th Amendment says there can be no blackmail or extortion. There can only be the fact that the debt ceiling is unconstitutional and default is illegal. It's a federal crime. If you want to solve the problem of Social Security, remove the cap on the payroll tax. It's solved. If you want to help Medicare along, let Part D do an aggressive haggle with Big Pharma on the cost of those prescription drugs. That will help a lot. The Wall Street sales tax remains the indispensable centerpiece. You want revenue, you want to close loopholes. They're talking about this. Bring on the Wall Street sales tax. Ed Schultz this week asked the hack Wasserman Schultz, would it be a Wall Street transaction tax? She dodged the issue. I would also mention Barbara Lee of Texas told Eliot Spitzer the 14th Amendment applies. Default is illegal. And remember, we want to revive the corporate income tax. We cannot have General Electric, Goldman Sachs, Citibank, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and the rest of them paying 0 to 1 to 2% federal corporate income tax. And above all, seize the Fed. Don't end the Fed. That idiotic slogan goes out with Ron Paul. Seize the Fed, nationalize the Fed, federalize the Fed, deprivatize the Fed. That's what we want. Now, the political system, we're seeing the decline of it since from 1968 to 2008. And again, we can now say that this change has been consolidated. 2008 was so much a personal messiah trip of Obama that it was impossible really to say whether that was a fluke or whether that was a permanent change. Now in 2012, even with the paper-thin majority of a couple of 100,000 votes that he got, we can still see the demographic trends. A normal Democrat, as distinct from a fallen messiah, would have had a much easier time, I would say. But it's based on the Kevin Phillips Southern strategy from Nixon 1968 to Mad Dog Bush the Younger in 2004. The Republican starts with the Old South. And, of course, this is based on the fact that instead of having the Democratic Solid South, 1865 to 1965, about, those Southern states, based on pure racism, flipped to the Republican Party, and that's why the Republican Party today is the opposite of the Lincoln one, right? It's completely transformed, has virtually no relation. So what does it mean when the center of gravity of your entire system is in the Deep South? Well, it means that the most economically, socially, culturally backward part of the United States becomes the center of gravity of the entire political system. Some ideas now. There's Confederate heritage. What is it? The Confederate heritage, alive and well in these southern states, the Dixiecrats, the Strom Thurmonds, the Trent Lotts, the Jesse Helms, the Ron Pauls, the Rand Pauls. You go from economic and political issues to social issues. In other words, it's all seen as a conflict among groups, the blacks, the Latinos, right, with animus. And, of course, this is wonderful for the people, the local oligarchs sitting on top. I would say some of the main differences of the South, and we look at cash, right, look at the mind of the South. This is a territorial oligarchy. This is cities, towns that are dominated by visible families who own the place, company towns, if you will. It's not the more modern kind of oligarchy of people hiding behind the market, right, New York City and places like this, but it's the older sort of neo-feudal, Lord lives on the hill, Lord dominates the surrounding territory. This is then the origin of deference and backwardness. This is a low-wage economy. Walmart, right? The southern model of a low-wage economy, of a union-busting economy, has been imposed on the United States by Walmart. This is one of the main vehicles of Confederate social relations. A declining standard of living has been the result. The U.S. standard of living began to decline in 1967-68 with the transition to the Southern strategy. Very little social spending. Remember, these Southern urban politicians did not want to tax people. The rich plantation owners of the postbellum society didn't want to be taxed, right? Very few public schools, very few public universities until you get well into the 20th century. Therefore, economic, social, political, intellectual backwardness. Status of women, not good. Obviously, status of minorities as bad could be. Contempt for science, and militarism. The constant harping on foreign wars, foreign aggression from 1968. And notice that the tendency is to have these wars and to lose them. Some of them you may think you won. The first Gulf War looked like it wasn't that bad, but then when it turned into the second Gulf War, it was clear that this was a strategic defeat, even if it might have been a tactical success. I would stress a ruling class of imbeciles. You want to know the roots of partisanship? Well, partisanship, we know. The pie is shrinking. It's an economic fact. Not every faction will survive. Therefore, they fight really hard because it's not just comparative advantage that they're contending for. It's their own existence. But a ruling class of imbeciles. If you look at the leaders of the Confederacy, the people who led the Confederate States out of the Union, Jefferson Davis, Stevens, Yancey, Lamar, Toombs, Quitman, this entire gaggle, the leading feature is they're imbeciles. They're Southern jurisdiction, Scottish Rite Freemasons, in cahoots with London, and they say, oh, now we have Lincoln, we're going to rebel because we think he's going to put an end to slavery. Lincoln would have had no way of ending slavery under the existing laws of the United States. These imbeciles started the Civil War, which destroyed them, at least to some degree, and they didn't need to do that. Their fate was sealed by their own hubris. So that was the center of gravity. We're moving Treatment Centers of America guy who owns Freedom Works at this point, paid out the $8 million to Dick Armey. This is not a matter of high principle. I just saw a woman on Fox News saying, oh, the Tea Party is a movement of high principle. The Tea Party is a movement of extortion and corporate welfare, except that the dupes at the bottom are too dumb to know it. Anyway, the hypnotic appeal of the capital gains, the estate tax, meant that Koch, Mellencamp, and these guys gave orders to the Tea Party, don't gum up the works, don't rock the boat. And so it was. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Radio. So we're just reviewing the results of the first round of clashes of the new year. This is the so-called fiscal cliff. And again, the key to getting that passed, in my view, was that in particular, Biden-McConnell inserted sweetheart giveaway rates to the super rich on capital gains and the estate tax, as well as this other exercise of lowering the threshold for a tax increase, or for raising it, actually, that Obama wanted it for families up to $250K, and the Republican plutocrats said, no, we want to save them up to $450K. That's debatable one way or another, but I think the inexcusable aspect is we needed to tax capital gains as ordinary income. That's number one. And the estate tax should have been kept in its full rigor. The estate tax is your last chance to nick those parasites, those hedge fund hyenas, corporate raiders, bandits, and looters who made out in the Reagan years, the Bush the Elder years, down to the present time. Last chance to nick them before they essentially put that money into foundations and their probably mentally deficient descendants. So that's the bad part. Now, you have a school of thought. Jeffrey Sachs wants austerity for all. There is a school of the... Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C. This is our first edition of the new year, 2013. It is, in fact, our Epiphany edition. We'll be celebrating Epiphany here in a couple of days. It is, of course, when the three magi of the Orient arrived in Bethlehem and got to see the face of God. And, of course, the Epiphany idea is you get to see what's what. You get to see the essence of things. So we've got to deliver on that promise, at least as best we can here. We've got to try to see into the essence of things. Epiphany, Sunday, January 6th. That's when this program, among other days, will be available on the air. So we've got to review, on the one hand, the haggling over the new Satan sandwich. This was Satan sandwich number 2, primarily because of 2 very toxic ingredients, which we will detail. And then we want to take this opportunity to create a kind of conceptual framework for the historical processes that will be operative in 2013 as best we can estimate. And we can't account for all of them. There is, for example, a heightened danger of a dip deeper into the Depression after a period of relative stagnation within the Depression. We may have another sickening downward lurch into the depths of the Depression. But main question now is the political framework and how do we get out of this. I urge you, as always, keep in touch through Tarpley.net, Tarpley.net, and Webster G. Tarpley Twitter. It was already media hype, right? It was a term, as we've stressed, invented by helicopter Ben Bernanke, undoubtedly designed by somebody like Frank Luntz, in order to create hysteria and to allow Republicans in particular to scare the public about this. It was not what it was cracked up to be, and it led to this season of haggling. Notice that on the verge of the final phase, John Boehner, the Republican Speaker of the House, lost control of his extreme right wing. In other words, the Tea Party, the fascistoid caucus of the Republican Party, a fascistoid caucus within a reactionary party. He lost control of them. He couldn't get his Plan B even voted on. He dropped out of the negotiations. And interestingly, it was at that point, it was left up to Biden to bring the Republicans back from the dead. After Plan B and that fiasco, and after Boehner taking himself out of the negotiations, the White House would have been amply justified in saying, this gaggle, you can't negotiate with them, they're not serious, let's take a vote, and if it doesn't pass, over we go, then we'll take another vote. But no, when Mitch McConnell, the plutocrat who believes that money is speech, right, one of the foremost representatives of the legions of greed on Capitol Hill, when Mitch McConnell called Biden eagerly jumped in to bring the Republicans back from the dead, to give them a voice, even after they had really disqualified themselves from any such role. So the design that they made in the Satan sandwich package is, you can see it especially on 2 points. And these are the 2 points that I object to the most. First of all, the capital gains tax. The capital gains tax for many people went from 15%. The Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed, very active here in recent days, during the time especially on Sunday here. Sunday. It was New Year's Day. It seemed like Sunday. The Tuesday of this week when the haggling was at its height. So let's well, we can have one happy note at the beginning. Goodbye to Ron Paul. Goodbye to the leprechaun. Goodbye to the most extreme exponent of fascist economics that we have anywhere in the Congress. His plan for $1 trillion in genocidal budget cuts, killer cuts, goes with him. He never implemented it. And I have to say, I have talked to various Ron Paul diehards during the Christmas holidays. Most of them do not know. They simply do not know, have not read, are not familiar with the true monstrosity of Ron Paul's budget cuts. They believe these throwaway lines that he wanted to cut the defense budget and save the domestic programs. Anything but. It's called Restore America. Take a look, and if you are not willing to read that, you should please shut up and not pervade disinformation about what this guy stood for. And the key example, cutting food stamps by 62%. If 50 million Americans live on $1.50 per person per meal, he wanted to bring that down to something like 50 cents per person per meal. And I'm sorry, that will kill. That would mean hundreds of thousands of deaths. So goodbye to the leprechaun. Unfortunately, we've still got little Rand, the mediocrity, encumbering the scene, but maybe with some of the tendencies we can identify, this particular brand of crazy may be on its way out. Now let's look at the fiscal cliff and its related solutions and so-called solutions and haggling. First of all, percent to 20% on capital gains. Now, for the super rich, there will be a couple of more percent having to do with Obamacare, but call it 20%. This is a monstrosity. Capital gains have to be taxed as ordinary income. No distinction made. Capital gains are income. Income can be considered capital gains. Remember that under capital gains, even the people who support this say income, your normal pay, is a capital gain, but only if you're a hedge fund hyena, only if you're Romney, only if it falls under the so-called carried interest loophole. So that is all a monstrosity. The only way to deal with that would have been to say there will be no more special rate on capital gains. It will be ordinary income in whatever tax bracket you happen to be located. But instead, Biden gave them this 20% sweetheart rate. The other question is the estate tax. Deeper research into this has convinced me that the estate tax should have gone to the Clinton levels, and instead a sweetheart deal on that was worked out. Now, this was a clever design in the sense that the two conspirators here, Biden and McConnell in particular, obviously put these two things in, the capital gains sweetheart rate and the estate tax sweetheart rate. And this is several hundred billion. This is something like 300 billion, 400 billion of revenue that the federal government will not get over the next decade. And the point is that the people who are most concerned about capital gains and the estate tax are the owners of the Tea Party. The Tea Party, a bunch of right-wing anarchists, rural dupes, bumpkins, hayseeds, yahoos, pitchforks, and so forth. Maybe they don't know it. They really should know it. They are owned by the Koch brothers, by Richard Mellon Scaife, and now by this guy Stevenson, right, the cancer